Welcome to Spiritual Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Bigger, and I'm back again with another episode. And I have the pleasure to have Dr. Katie Deming. She's a radiation oncologist. She talks all about medicine, integrative medicine to help people heal from cancer. And she's on today and she's going to talk about cancer, emotions, spirituality, and healing. And Katie, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Eric. I'm doing great. It's nice to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. So I want to start with a quote from your TEDx, from your TED Talk about how to speak to a cancer patient. I don't know if that was the title, but you said something at the end and it kind of like stuck out. And I want to read the quote to you. We can start there. You said, how to speak to those we want to heal. What does that actually mean? I actually love that. How did you get to that paradigm of those words to say it in that moment?
Well, I think that, this talk, that particular TED Talk, how to talk to someone with cancer, really questions a lot of the things that we do in society and the way that we speak about cancer using battle language and using the term survivor, which as an oncologist I think when I first really heard this idea that word was problematic, I had been practicing for over 10 years. And so I think I ended the talk with, saying, how do we want to speak to those we want to heal is like really calling attention to, is this language the way that we heal? And I would argue that it's not, that when we want to heal using language like fighting and battling and all of this stuff that ramps up our sympathetic nervous system is not the way to heal, because the way that we heal is when we are in rest and when we are at peace. That is the best state for healing of the body.
Yeah, relaxation, meditation. And I like to get to the root of things, on a podcast, because there's so much surface level in the world we live in, and we don't know where things come from, right? So when I think of the word cancer, in the month of July, it's cancerines, people with cancer, it actually has a negative connotation when I say it, like you're a cancer, right? But for me, because of the word, the way it's perceived most of my life, I have a negative connotation towards it because how it's been publicized. My question to you, what is the root word to cancer? Where did it come from and who created it? And then on top of that, who binds survivor to cancer? Like, where does that start and where does that come from? Where does the history lie for that word to have an impact on our nervous system?
Wow. So that's such an interesting question that I've actually never looked into the origins of the word cancer. But the truth is that when we use that in a medical setting, the word that we use is carcinoma, which is just defined by cells that are growing uncontrolled, right? And so when a pathologist looks at a biopsy, they basically define something as normal tissue or precancerous or cancer or carcinoma. And I'm not sure how we got to cancer from carcinoma. So I actually will have to research that after this conversation. I don't know the history of that piece, but I will say that the way that we perceive cancer in society today is not based on the biology of the disease, but rather the fear, all of that negative emotion that's associated with a diagnosis that many people see as like a death sentence. They hear cancer and think that's it, right? This is the end, and am I going to be here for my kids? And, catastrophizing. But the truth is that is not cancer. And also cancer is like 200 different conditions, right? We say one thing, but it's so many different things fall under the umbrella of cancer. And I'll just take, one of the most common types of cancer, breast cancer, is, it used to be when I started my practice in 2006. And at that time, if someone was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, so stage 4, they had a survival of like 18 months. So it really was a poor prognosis. But today, women who have breast cancer that is estrogen driven can live decades actually with stage 4 disease. And I don't think that story is talked about, that really people can do quite well. But we have this, I said that in my TEDx talk, that even just the word cancer, that whole talk is about language and healing. But the word cancer itself is like a bomb going off in people's head of just so many things that we've been programmed to believe that are just not true.
It is. It's a scary word. I mean, even when you say stage 4, I had a friend who passed away years ago from, it wasn't colon cancer. What is the other one? Pancreatic. Pancreatic. And he was an air traffic controller, and I guess working at that, with an airport or where he was working at. He was 43 years old, and he had stage 4, and he died within like 3 months. But it was the stage 4 that triggered me. I'm like, oh snap! I went in straight into fight or flight. Like, well, how can I pray? How can I help? Right? Like, mind you, I don't even have the back history on the information of what it means. But I also want to get to, like I said, to the root of, okay, I talked about the word, but you had a YouTube clip. I can't recall interview, but you were talking about trauma and pain from someone's childhood, and later in life they can manifest cancer in their body, because I believe the body keeps the score. It's a book as well, if you're not familiar. Another book by Louise Hay is called "You Can Heal Your Life." And in the back of the book, she has probable causes for these ailments that are emotional. So can you speak briefly on what were you elaborating in the interview about trauma and childhood, how that can manifest in one's life to be cancer? Like what type of trauma, what could it be for some people?
Sure. Well, and before I explain that, I'd like to explain how I got to learn about that, because I ended up leaving Western medicine in 2022 because I had an experience similar to a near-death experience, but it's actually called a shared death experience that happens to medical professionals who are at the scene where someone transitions, and they can have a metaphysical experience like a near-death. And that happened to me in 2020. And after that event, I had been a radiation oncologist and a healthcare leader serving at a very high level. And I knew something was wrong with the way we were practicing medicine, because people were coming in younger and younger. And as a population, we were getting sicker. So I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what the problem was. And after this event, I just knew I had to leave. And I was like, the problem was I didn't know what the solution was. I just knew that the way that we were healing was not true healing for the body. And not to say that there's not a place for Western medicine, but I just saw that this was not it. And I knew that I needed to leave. And as I made that transition to start to step out of Western medicine, I started to research what makes us well, what contributes to illness that maybe I wasn't taught in medical school. Like everything that we're taught in medicine is about pathophysiology, what goes wrong in the body. And then we're taught, okay, this is what's wrong, and you give this medicine to fix it. Or in my case, you give radiation to try and fix it. But when I stepped out and started looking at actually what makes someone well, healing, the definition of healing is to bring wholeness back to the being. And wholeness really requires physical healing, emotional healing, mental and spiritual healing. So I started digging into these different areas. And the first area that really caught my attention was emotions. And I love the emotional wheel behind you. All the feelings is beautiful. Yes, so that's perfect. That's what I talk about all day long. So what I realized was that there was all this data, and the biggest study that caught my attention was the ACE study. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Events Study. And this is a very large study that followed thousands of children into adulthood and calculated the number of emotional traumas that they had in childhood. And they called these adverse childhood events, but they are such things as physical abuse, neglect, parent with a substance abuse, parent who's incarcerated, divorce, the list goes on, but all of the traumatic things that you can think of in childhood. And what they found was the higher the ACE score, the higher the incidence of disease in adulthood. So cardiovascular disease, cancer, lung disease, and diabetes. And so for me, this was shocking because I was never taught this in medical school. And this is a big deal. And I love that you brought up the body keeps the score, because this is right, that our body does keep the score from emotional trauma. And then the other thing that I started to look at was the radical remission data. And this comes from Kelly Turner, where she studied people who cured their illness, most of them cancer, without conventional therapy or without therapy that they would have expected to cure the illness. And what she did was she looked at what are the factors that are common among these people who are curing themselves. And she came up with 10 factors that was in common. And of course, when we look at studies like this, it's not causation, but there's a correlation. Clearly, these people are doing things in common that are helping them cure their illness. And 2 of the things on her list of 10 had to do with emotions. One of them was releasing past trauma. And the other was cultivating positive emotions. So helping people move out of negative emotions and cultivating positive emotions. And for me, this was huge because I was like, this is a big component that we are totally missing in Western medicine. And in fact, with what we just talked about with the diagnosis of cancer, what does it do? It actually causes another traumatic event emotionally, all the fear, all the worry. And so for me, it made me realize, like, number one, we need to be talking to people about their emotional experiences and what they've had so that we can help them release that and lighten their load from past trauma. But then the other thing is we need to teach people how to become fluent with their emotions. How do you process emotions in a healthy way and don't suppress them or, bypass them? And so this is a big part of my practice now, is teaching people, number one, the importance of releasing past trauma. And then the second piece of learning how to process your emotions so you're not re-traumatized by the emotional component of the diagnosis of cancer.
Yeah, and I think you're harping on, the fact that EQ is so important, emotional intelligence, emotional awareness of what our body and minds are processing. Can you give the audience, people listening or people who might watch this, can you give them some tools from your toolkit that they can use to kind of like maneuver from that emotional trauma or pain or, past experience to kind of help them shift the paradigm into a more healthy body or consciousness?
With emotions and emotional trauma, if someone is sick, it is actually can be challenging to have them do like talk therapy to work through emotional trauma because it can re-traumatize them when they're in a vulnerable state. And so my practice is that I do have clients who are doing, maybe they're already seeing a therapist and talking, but the techniques that I've found are most effective for trauma release when someone is stressed, like dealing with a medical illness, is doing subconscious work. And you can release emotional trauma from the subconscious in a much more gentle way that doesn't re-traumatize them or bring up things that can basically weaken them when they're already in a weakened state. And so one of the tools that I use the most in my practice is something called Psych K. And that's PSYCH and the letter K. And Bruce Lipton talks about this in Biology of Belief, and he used it himself to really transform his life. And Psych K is a subconscious technique or modality that does a few things. Number one, it can release past trauma from the subconscious mind. It also can reprogram the subconscious mind for more empowering stories around health and healing. And the third thing that it does is it teaches a whole brain technique to help facilitate emotional processing. And so the emotional processing, I want to talk about that piece because I think that is something that not many people have heard of. I had never heard of it before. But basically, when we get into emotions, we tend to get into one side of the brain or the other. And if we are in our right side of our brain, we sometimes can be worried about becoming overly emotional because that's like the feminine side of the brain. And it's just like a more feminine approach of becoming very emotional. And people worry that if I allow the emotion and I'm in this side, it basically feels overwhelming, and then I want to kind of shove it down. The other side of the brain, the left side of the brain, when we experience emotions and we're in our left side of the brain, that is a more masculine or logical processing, and people tend to just shut it down and basically explain away the emotions and just get into logic and reason. And both of those can be problematic because they don't allow us to experience the natural wave of an emotion. So emotions are designed to rise, and then they'll crest, and then they'll neutralize if we allow them. But most of us have been conditioned to, whether it's you're, told don't show your emotions because that's not manly or whatever, or you're so emotional. And so people learn to start suppressing their emotions. And what Psych K does is you do positioning of the body, and Psych K stands for psychological kinesis. And kinesis just means basically the positioning of our body. And so you get them into a position that activates the corpus callosum, which connects the right and the left hemispheres of the brain. And when someone experiences emotions, when they have both sides of the brain activated, it makes it easier to ride that wave and not either get overly emotional or explain it away and go into logic and reason. And so that is one of the techniques that can be taught. And I'm not a Psych K practitioner. Basically, you can go onto the website for Psych K and find a practitioner, and they will teach you these techniques that are so powerful, both for release, reprogramming the subconscious mind, and then learning how to experience emotions. But what I'll explain is that when you get into this whole brain state and you experience the emotions, you are able to ride that wave and then recognize that the emotions neutralize themselves if you allow them to flow through you. And that is very empowering for people to recognize that they can be with their emotions and not lose, feel like they're losing control and actually get down to neutral. So I use this quite a bit in my practice, helping the clients. I work with a Psych K practitioner, and then they use these techniques like before they go into a doctor's appointment. They will get into position and basically feel whatever anxiety or fear that they're feeling about the appointment and get to neutral, so that then when they walk in to see the doctor, they're grounded and they can make decisions from an empowered place. Because if you can imagine, if you're afraid and you're off balance, all of this, going on in their bodies, and then they go into a doctor who basically sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher, like, wow, wow, wow. They can barely process all the information when you're in your emotions, and helping people get out of that into a grounded state can be really powerful to help through a diagnosis like cancer. So that is one of the techniques that I use the most.
Yeah, it sounds like a grounding technique to get people kind of grounded in calm and, at ease, because if we're all here in our consciousness trying to figure out what should I do, is something bad going to happen, this and that, and you can't really feel what the emotions are coming up. So you're fighting them. And I get clients sometimes, they want to control the thoughts, but they only control the negative thoughts and not thinking about the good thoughts, because the negative thoughts only make sense for whatever the trauma or negativity they're experiencing about the outcome that they're not getting, right? So I realize some people, they stay in this negative loop because they can control what they potentially might see that's not real. Oh, I'm not going to get the job. They're not going to call me back. Oh, if my breast is hurting, that means I have a lump on my chest, so it could be cancer, right? They start creating this narrative that makes sense, that makes it logical for the body to say, okay, this is true. And then eventually they manifest, you said a few things about letting emotions flow through you and how the physical aspect of the subconscious, physiology. And I think what I like to tell people, movement is medicine and motion changes emotion. So can you speak on the benefits of spirituality in fitness and how those two components can prevent cancer or prevent anybody in their life from having these ailments or illnesses of cancer or something similar from your perspective, from what you know?
Yeah, well, this is so interesting. I've never thought about that in terms of fitness and spirituality necessarily. But what I can say is that cancer and other chronic illnesses that we are seeing rising at epidemic proportions right now, like diabetes, neurodegenerative disease, cancer, they are all a result of a toxic lifestyle. That the modern lifestyle is what is making us sick, and we are not moving. Yeah. Right. So there's, from a physical aspect, we're not moving our bodies like we used to move. We're not connecting with the sun. We're not connecting with the earth. We're living in these houses with electronics all around and the EMFs and all these things. We've become very disconnected from the natural environment that we were designed for. And then we're eating foods that are processed, that are not, humanely raised. And all of that is affecting us. Basically, we're taking in toxicity. We're also taking in emotional toxicity and mental toxicity and all of that. And then the spiritual aspect, from my perspective, when I think about spirituality and illness, I'm speaking mostly about who you are at your core. Like, who are you? Who are you here to be? And most of us have been conditioned to become someone that fits with their family of origin, the schools that they went to, the government that they were, under. So all of these things are conditioning us to become something that fits into that paradigm. But oftentimes that is not who we truly are. And illness can be a manifestation of being out of alignment with who you are at your core. And so this is another piece of the modern lifestyle, is that we are being conditioned to become someone other than our true selves. And this also can be related to development of illness in the body.
Yeah, and it's so true, because I know for sure most people, at least in America, I would say, from what I know, not most, because most is wrong. Majority of the people don't know what they're doing because we haven't been programmed or conditioned to know ourselves, right? To know our ancestral lines, our background, who we really are, how we really think. Like you said in the beginning, some practitioners or doctors, they're told to do things a certain way. And you felt a nudge that I don't feel this. This is not right. Why are we practicing like this to heal this ailment? We should be doing something else. And then you had a shared experience, you said. And so I want to talk and shift the conversation to who Dr. Katie Deming, who is she, right? What is her background? What is her roots? How did she get into this medicine to help people heal? And why cancer? Why not, physical therapy or, spiritual healing? Like, did you grow up in this background? Like, where are you from? And like, how did you become the woman you are today? Because for me speaking to you, and I came to you as a patient or client, your energy makes me feel like I can trust you, right? And I love how you articulate knowing and your beliefs around everything that you're doing. But who is Katie, and how do we get to know more of who she is outside of the title of a doctor and all the things she practiced? Because I think that's important. Your energy that comes through is so authentic.
Thank you. So I think that that's evolving, right? I think we're always going to be learning about ourselves. And honestly, a lot of my journey of becoming who I am today and will continue to become something throughout my life is a lot of it is the undoing and the letting go, right? But there are clues to who I was throughout my lifetime. And you can see those, right? But you only see them looking back. It's like looking forward, it's not so clear. But now that I look back at my life, I can see how everything led here to where I am in this new practice. I grew up in California. So I grew up in Northern California, and then I was a springboard diver, and went to UC Santa Barbara and was on the swimming and diving team there.
I love Santa Barbara. My favorite.
I know, it's my favorite place on the planet. I love it. So when I was in Santa Barbara, I was studying biopsychology and neuroscience. Basically, I was interested in the biologic basis of psychology. So understanding what was going on in the brain, what was going on in the body that was causing people to behave in different ways. And I didn't know what I would do with that as a career. I was like, well, I guess I could become a doctor, or could do research. Right now I know that I could do anything, right? You could do anything with an undergraduate degree. But at the time I was really like, gosh, what am I going to do with this? And at the time, my mom was a nurse practitioner, and she was like, I don't know that you want to be a doctor. Like, I know that you love children and you want to have a family. And most of the doctors that she worked with were male at that time. Is quite different than it is today. And so I was like, I don't know. I said, well, what would I really not like about medicine? And maybe I can just cross it off my list. And so I had never had anyone close to me die. And so I thought that I would find death or being around people who are dying very challenging if I went to medical school. So I decided to go volunteer at hospice when I was 20 years old. And that experience, obviously, it didn't turn out as I was hoping to cross medicine off my list by volunteering at hospice. That experience just changed my life. Because at 20 years old, we're so self-centered and think the world revolves around us. And like, we're just like trying to do all the things. And I learned so many things from these people who were facing the end of their life. And they were so generous with me of sharing the things that they wish they had known before they got to this place of looking back. And the things that they shared with me are a lot of the things that actually are there's a book, Regrets of the Dying, that was written by a hospice nurse. And the number one thing that she said, people said to her, was the exact same thing that people said to me. And it was, I wish I had the courage to be myself. Oh my God. That is the number one regret. And that was the number one thing that I heard from them. And other things that they would say to me was, I wish I had, just been me. Like, I wish I had been able to just be me and not done what everyone else wanted me to do. And I wish I hadn't worked so much, right? And so all of these pieces, but at 20, I was just hooked. I was fascinated by them because they had so much wisdom and they were so generous. And the intimacy of being with people who are at the end of their life is so beautiful because they're open, and also the veil starts to thin at the end of life and they start to see things more clearly. And so I was hooked, and I knew from that experience that I wanted to not only go to medical school, but I wanted to work with cancer patients because I wanted to be with people who were facing life-threatening illness because of this intimacy, because of the beauty that can be seen, when someone faces a life-threatening illness. But what was interesting was when I interviewed for medical school, I interviewed at probably 6 schools, I think. And you interview with like 6 different doctors at each school. And I only interviewed with one oncologist in all of the schools that I interviewed at. And I was so excited to meet this guy. I was just like, oh my gosh, it was the first oncologist that I was going to meet. I had never met an oncologist before. And so he said, I see in your personal statement that you want to become an oncologist. And why? And so I told him about this experience at hospice and how it just changed my life, and that I wanted to be with people who were dealing with cancer, and that the intimacy that I wanted to have that intimate relationship with patients. And if I had such an amazing experience as a volunteer, what would it be like to be their doctor? That man crushed me.
Oh, wow.
He looked at me and he was like, that is not a good reason for you to become an oncologist. If you want to become an oncologist, you have to love the science because you have 8 years of science ahead of you in order to do this. If you just want to be with people with cancer, you could be a therapist, you could be a nurse, you could be all these other things, that you have to love the science. And I took that, his what he said, now I see in retrospect, I'm like, maybe there was some truth, because now that I've experienced this side of practicing medicine, I see maybe what he was saying. But at the time I thought he was saying I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't good enough, or whatever. Right. And so I remember I walked out of that interview and just was like tears streaming down my face of just like, oh my gosh, like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know this. And then I decided that I was never going to tell anyone again, at least in, when I went to medical school and all of that, my reasons for wanting to go into it, because I thought, gosh, this is, maybe not a good reason. But I knew that what he was saying was not because I wasn't smart enough. I was interviewing at Harvard, so obviously I was smart enough to become a doctor, but it started to open my eyes to not everyone saw things the way that I did, and so I started, medical school, then went eventually into radiation oncology. And I spent a lot of time around people dying in my career just out of my own interest in that. So about half of my practice was palliative, meaning those people would eventually die of their illness. Mm. And so I learned so much wisdom from being close to death throughout my career. And I felt like there's so much that we can learn from people who are close to the end of their life that it's hard to see it unless things are really turned upside down in your life to see what's really important, what matters. And one of the things that I loved about being an oncologist is that all the BS falls away. When someone's dealing with cancer, it gets real, and that you're really dealing with what's important in life. And that to me has always been kind of the thing that's kept me going is being close to people and really having this intimate connection with my patients. Anyway, this whole concept of being close to death, being close to dying has continued to inform me. And in 2019, I started to have those little nigglings like, something's not right. Like people, like I was saying before, I was having this feeling like something's not right, but I couldn't put my finger on it because it didn't make sense. I was making lots of money. I was, doing good work. My patients liked me. My colleagues respected me. It was like, and I had said to my husband, I said, I know this is weird, but I feel like I'm not supposed to be practicing radiation oncology. Mm. And he was like, that makes no sense. And he's like, you didn't finish your training until you were 32 years old. So I didn't have my first job until I was 32. He's like, you make $500,000, you work 4 days a week, you're good at your job. Well, maybe something is wrong with you if you're not happy. Yeah. And so he was like, you basically have everything that anyone would want. And if you can't be happy with that, maybe there's a problem with you, and maybe you're just never going to be happy. Yeah. And so I had internalized that for a little while, and I was like, gosh, is there something wrong with me? It's like, I just couldn't put it together. And then in 2019, I helped a patient die using something called medical aid in dying. And that is where you can, if someone has a terminal illness in certain states, you can have a doctor write a prescription so that if there were, suffering that is, excessive, when someone just decides that it's their time, they can actually take medications to end their life on their terms. And so that is legal in Oregon. And so when I first moved to Oregon, I was approached about it by one of my patients, and I was like, no, I'm like, I took an oath to do no harm. I'm like, I'm definitely not going to write a prescription to end someone's life. But then I watched a movie, a documentary, and this was early in my career. Maybe it was like 2008 or something, 2009. And a movie came out called How to Die. How to Die in Oregon or something, I think. It basically was about this process. Now it's called medical aid in dying. At the time, it was called death with dignity. And it really made me understand that it's a compassionate thing to do, that we do it for animals. why would we not allow humans to choose if they were suffering excessively to end that suffering? And so after watching that film, I decided that, okay, if a patient ever came to me and wanted to explore this process, I would be open to that so that they would have a physician that they trusted who's willing to participate. And then I also made the decision that if any of my patients pursued this, that I would physically be with them when they took the medication if they wanted that. And most doctors don't. They would just prescribe the medication, and then the patient actually has to take the medication themselves. So it's not a physician-assisted suicide, or no one else can give them the medication. They have to take it. So in 2019, I had all those years actually had some requests about this, but a lot of patients who start the process never end up needing to take the medications or whatever. And so it wasn't until 2019 that I had a patient end up taking the medication. And so I was with her and her daughter, and it was one of the most beautiful transitions I had ever experienced. But when I left her house, I knew that when I left this body and when I moved on to whatever was next, I was leaving alone. I don't know why that day, that was just so profound for me that I was like, I cannot let anyone else tell me how to live my life, because when I'm leaving alone, and I'm not going with my husband who's saying, you should stay in this job or whatever. I can't point to him and say, he made me do it. He wanted me to stay in this job because it provided a, stable income and all the rest. And so I think that it had started kind of there, that unraveling where I just was like, I'm not going to get to the end of my life and regret doing what I know is true. But I still had this, I wasn't totally sure why I needed to leave. And so then in 2020, when this happened, it was just clear. And all of a sudden I knew. And because I had had that experience in 2019, I knew that if I had the conviction that I was supposed to do something different, that if I didn't do it, when I got to the end of my life, I would be just like those people who had that regret of not having the courage to be themselves. And that's really what did it for me. And my decision to leave Western medicine totally blew up my life, as you can imagine, because, all of my financial security, everything was tied into that. And then to have a partner who wasn't supportive, I went through a divorce, basically had to sell everything. Yeah, it just basically blew up my life.
Yeah, spiritual awakening, like the ego.
Yes. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Wow. And that's the thing, and I've been listening. And I want to ask you a question. It might sound odd, or maybe not. There's two. So the one question is, have you tapped into your spiritual powers?
Yeah.
Do you believe you can bring people back from dying? I feel like you got a gift to I don't know, save people from dying, or it's like a spiritual thing about your nature. I can't explain it, because for you to get all that information at 20, to work in hospice and get people regrets when they're on their deathbed, to have that information, I call it a prerequisite before you got to the spiritual awakening. You already had the information, right? The universe gave you the information, and then you made a decision. And I also feel like it led you to your soul's calling, your soul's purpose, because you already served the ego's purpose. Come to, oncologist and make all this money, and you have everything that everybody would want, but you wasn't fulfilled. There's a quote, success is getting what you want. Fulfillment is doing what you're called to do, what you're made for, right? So I don't know if you had.
Yeah. So, and I have, now I'm starting to talk about this a little more, but what happened after that first shared death experience was that my gifts started to open, and so I can basically, the best way that I would describe it is that I'm a death walker or a death doula, that I can help people make that transition from this realm to the next. So when someone is ready to transition, often the hardest part is letting go. And letting go to surrender, to walk that path to the light. And I didn't know that I had this gift. I didn't know any of this. After the shared death experience, I was different. So, David Hawkins talks about in Power versus Force, he talks about people who have near-death experiences are bathed with very high frequencies when they go outside the veil, and it tunes their antenna to this higher level information. Like if you look at the scale of consciousness, and that is what happened to me. I just was tuned to something different. And suddenly I started to know things that I never learned in this lifetime. And so that started to happen to me, and I would receive information. But then the other thing is that I had a patient who I was very close to. I had been her doctor for 16 years. She was a young woman with breast cancer, and she had a young daughter who was 9 years old. And this was in, 2021. So my shared death experience was in the fall of 2020. And in 2021, she basically went into a coma. And her husband, I was on vacation, and all of this is very synchronistic. I never go on vacation by myself. I was on vacation in Ojai by myself at a hotel, and her husband starts texting me that she's in a coma and that the doctors, he didn't trust the doctors. You know what I'm saying? It was when she was sick, he wanted to talk with someone that knew them very well and that they trusted. And so he was talking to me, and it was clear that she was dying, basically what was happening. And I could tell that there was some resistance, and she did not want to die. A lot of people don't want to die, but a young mother with a 9-year-old daughter is like, hell no, I am not leaving. And she was just so stuck, and he was like, she doesn't want to go, but I can see her body is failing. And I was in this place where I was like, I think I could help, but I also want to, respect her free will. And also I don't want to step into say something to him that is I didn't even know that I had the gift. I just sensed that I could help in some way. And so I said to him, I had this experience before where I connected with someone while they were transitioning. I think that I might be able to connect with her. Would you be okay if I attempted to connect with her? She's in a coma at this point. And he was like, yes, because he trusted me. We had a very close relationship. And so over the next couple of days while I was on vacation, at the Ojai Valley Inn, just this beautiful place. It's very spiritual in and of itself, right? And I basically started checking in with her. I would go into meditation and try and connect with her. And she was very resistant at first. I could feel her. She was almost like a bee, buzzing and just basically pushing me away. I'm not ready. And I just told her, I said, there is no hurry. I have no agenda, but I just want you to know that if you need help, I'm here and I will keep checking on you. And so over several days, I kept checking in on her in meditation. And then eventually, this was the second day or something, I had this experience where I was having a massage. And actually this brings tears to my eyes because it was so powerful. But Mother Teresa came into me and said, I'll show you how to walk her home. And I've never read Mother Teresa's work, but the things that she told me, I later went and read, and they were word for word things that she's written before. And basically, the next time I went back into meditation, my patient told me she was ready. And so Mother Teresa took her hand and had me take her other hand and showed me how to walk her home. And for her, it was like a grassy hill that she needed to walk. And that's where that initial transition, it could be up to a light, it could be to a tunnel. For her, it was this hill. But basically, at the top of the hill, there was this giant man who looked like a bear, 300 pounds, 6'2", 6'3", big guy. And then this little woman with him. And Mother Teresa, myself, walked this patient up the hill. And then when she got to the top, she jumped into the man's arms and she just said, "Daddy." And
Mother Teresa said, our work is done. And basically, when I came out, I texted her husband and I asked, what is her dad? Did her dad already pass? And I said, can you send me a picture of him? And I said, and I think there's another woman, but I don't think it's her mom. And sure enough, he sends me a picture of her dad. It's like a giant man that's like just this huge guy who looks like a bear, exactly like what I saw. And then her aunt, Millie, was this little woman who was the other one with him, and they had both already passed. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was confirmation that this was real, And the reason why for the tears is that it's overwhelming, the beauty and to have, spirit guides come in when someone's transitioning, and the spirit guides will be different depending on that person's beliefs, right? But my mom also passed in 2022, and I helped her as well. And hers was different. It's like, so this is the interesting thing that each time it's different, but the big challenge that is apparently related to my gift is helping them just come to peace with letting their body go, releasing the attachment to this body. And for my mom, it was also Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa came in and she told her, we were both standing on either side of her. And my mom said to me, in this space, we had like a very challenging relationship in the last couple of months of her life, because I had mentioned that she had cancer in my TED Talk. And she had before told me that it was okay to share that. But after I gave the talk, she had a surgery that was unsuccessful, and she decided she didn't want people to know she had cancer. And I had already shared it. And so we had this, kind of rift where she was upset with me. But in her transition, when Mother Teresa and I were standing on either side of her, she said to me, she's like, I wish I had known who you were when I was alive. How do you know these important people? And anyway, Mother Teresa basically told her, it's time to let the body go, and started to unzip her, and basically took a zipper and just unzipped her body down. And the body just like fell down, and just light started emerging that just merged into everything and engulfed us all. And another guide that is with me that my mom didn't know, but I've now had contact with, was also behind her. And basically it was the most beautiful experience, but it's like these things are hard to explain. And also, like, I have not been super forthcoming with all of this because it's hard to even articulate or explain, or do people understand it, you know?
I understand it. Listen, it's miracle season. This is what spiritual fitness is about, because your spirit is so fit to hold space for people to transition. And I knew when I saw you, I'm like, she's more than what the words say. There's something going on. And now I understand it. So let me get this clear, so I'm not thinking the opposite. So do people come to you when they're ready to go? And do you know they're ready to go, like, or do you walk them out, but do you ever keep people staying? Is there like a choice? I don't know if you saw the Soul movie that was animated on Disney, where Jamie Foxx became the cat and the cat became the guy, and then he went into the coma and it was like in space and trying to decide if they should leave Earth.
Yes.
People decide.
The way that I would describe this is that when we come and we incarnate in a human form, our wholeness, which is one with everything, connects to the finiteness of this body. And that when we are open, when we are the fullest version of ourselves, we are connected to that wholeness. Right. But then we have the ego, we have the human, there's kind of always this like dance between the two. But sometimes, someone thinks that they're ready and
the higher self is like, no, it's not time. Or, the opposite. You can have this like where people think that they want to go or they're not ready. And the higher self is like, no, the time. So I don't know someone's soul contract and what they're here for. And so I always am just open to the free will and seeing what unfolds. But the truth is that I think that there are things at play that we may not be privy to. And also the other thing is I don't do this in my practice. So I'm telling you this right now, but this is not something that I've been forward facing with. So people come to me to heal cancer, but this is something that is obviously part of my gifts and that I'm sure at some point I will do more of, but I haven't. So this has not been part of my work. This has been more just something that's been unfolding.
It is. I'm like, seriously, I'm getting like, okay, when is the book coming out? When is the movie going to be written? What are writers? What are producers? Like, this is a movie. Like, literally, I'm looking at you. I'm like, hold on, this is a movie. And what I'm getting, like, as well as you can walk people in that transition, I also feel like you can help people, deny that if you come in with the guidance, I feel like you guys till your existence.
Well, and so I'll talk about my current practice is that I help people heal naturally. And that sometimes actually when someone is getting really close to the door is when that connection to their wholeness can happen and the divine healing happens. Mm-hmm. And that's what radical remissions are, is that I really think it's us connecting with our higher divine self and recognizing that we have the capacity to heal. And an example of that is, I don't know if you've read Anita Moorjani's book, Dying to Be Me.
No, that's a great title though.
Yeah, so she she basically was paranoid about breast cancer because about cancer in general, because her best friend had cancer, her brother-in-law had cancer, and she was like eating vegan and doing all these things to basically not get cancer. And she ended up getting a lymphoma herself. And what happened is that she ended up getting so sick that she was dying of the lymphoma and went into kidney failure. And when she went into kidney failure, she had a near-death experience. And in the near-death experience, she basically connected with her divine self and realized that she had created the cancer out of her fear and that she could also heal it. She basically came back into her body and healed all of the tumors and now travels the world to share her story. And this is what I'm doing in my practice, is I'm teaching people how to clear out their bodies so that they can connect with their higher self and they can heal. And and even this morning, I just got a call from one of my clients where we've been doing this practice, all of these pieces, the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual, and her cancer is gone. They can't find it.
Oh, you are amazing. By the way, do you believe in, or have you experienced plant medicine?
So I work with a very powerful healer who has done a lot of plant medicine. I don't know if you've read the books from Carlos Castaneda.
I heard it's the title, but no.
The Don Juan Teachings of Don Juan.
I heard of it, but I'm asking that because I just was in Peru in May and I experienced Wachuma, the cactus plant. Mm. And it opened my heart. And the downloads I got from the grandfathers that this medicine can heal cancer. That's the downloads I got. And so I know it's not legal in the States, but I know out there it's legal. So I'm just saying, based on your practice, it makes sense you have this type of energy around you. You're a healer. And then here's another question, and maybe you can help. So I have a former coach, right? Great guy. He has a son. His son just got drafted into the NBA. I won't say his name, but his son was a lottery pick. 30 days or maybe 60 days right before he goes to the draft, he gets diagnosed with kidney cancer, stage 4. And he had like 3 surgeries already. And so a lot of people, he opened up to me last week about it. And I know a lot of this stuff is spiritual. So outside looking in from what you might be channeling right now, what you might know, what is something he can do for because I'm gonna reach out to him because I probably can share your information. But what is something he can do that's tangible steps that can kind of, I can't say remove it. I don't even know what I'm asking. I'm just saying what remedy would you prefer him to think about or do in the process that he's in?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that it's different for everyone, right? So everyone is an individual, and the disease that they manifest is different depending on what they've experienced. But with, when you're doing Western medicine for cancer, they're focused on eradicating the cancer, but not looking at the deeper issues, like what is going on, whether there's emotional trauma, whether there's, suppressed emotions, what's going on. I think really looking at what is the root cause of this illness? What is it related to? And my belief is that cancer is an imbalance of increased toxicity in the body and lowered immune function. And what you want to do is you want to start looking at the areas of your life that have toxicity, like emotional toxicity, mental, mind kind of thoughts, and also what we're eating and how we're eating and connecting with the elements and protecting from EMFs and all of those things. So there's all those pieces. And then the spiritual aspect of who are you, and what's out of alignment and who knows, and it could be, it's never one thing that causes cancer. It's usually multiple things. And so what I would say is that you want to be looking at all of these aspects, but it also is up to the free will of the individual, because some people just aren't open to that, and so that's where I'm always like, these are the things that I would be looking at, but then also respecting that he's on his own journey.
And it was so interesting because of the contrast, right? It's like cancer happens, but your son makes it to the NBA and he's a lottery pick and he's actually good, so it's like all these years being a father, and then boom, son 18, 19, boom, he makes it to the NBA. You've been coaching him, his whole life, waking him up 4 or 5 a.m. to go to the gym to shoot the basketball. This happens and that happened. And I'm just like, okay. Is there some?
And is it the son who has cancer or the father?
Father.
The father.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, wow, right before, like 60 days before the draft, you get notice that that's what's going on. And then you have 3 surgery. So, but yeah, I just was curious. And I can't wait to look for the Netflix documentary of you, the movie. Not even from because I feel like the world is becoming more spiritual, and I feel like most people need spiritual currency. And with all the old ways of the Western way of thinking and being and doing, it's not really helping. And people want results. And sometimes the best way to go is go within and get the information and get the medicine from your soul, because your soul is medicine, right? And you get wisdom that can turn you upside down and take you to your divine union to be complete and be whole and to clear that energy. And so I'm just so thankful for who you are, the work you've done, for you to answer the call to shift from the practice to your own practice, to be consciousness, to be this healer in a way that you can't really put in a box. And so, Katie, this is amazing. Like, I don't know if a book is in the process. I'm just excited to know you, because I'm all about having resources, and you never know who you're going to meet and why you're going to meet them. But I know for sure, like, you're definitely a messenger or angel in this lifetime, and people need to know more about you, need to hear you. And I just look forward to seeing you grow and amplify this gift, right? And own it, step into it, right? And like, yes, I'm here. What do you need? Let's go. Before we get off, is there anything you want to share with people who might be going through a rough patch in life, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? You don't have to be cancer related or illness, just in general, something they could probably like focus on or give life or light to kind of make them feel better.
Yeah. Well, actually, so this is a practice that I'd known about this before, but I just came back upon it. And it's from a hypnotist in the early 1900s, Emil Coué. And the practice is that 20 times when you wake up and before you go to sleep, you repeat this 20 times. And it's day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And that is so powerful. Like, I started recommending this for my clients because Cooey and some other physicians were curing people with illness in the 1900s using this. And so I started using it with my clients, and I was like, okay, well, I want to use it too. And just to see what what it can do. And what's beautiful about this saying is it doesn't matter what you're going through or what you are wanting to become better and better at. It's like so broad and so open that your mind doesn't, sometimes when you do affirmations, your brain kind of is like, well, that's not really true, right? But with this one, it's so gentle. Day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better, and repeating that into the subconscious mind, because we are always getting better. And it is a very challenging time to live on this planet, and that all of us need healing, and all of us need to, have that hope that we are getting better. And I think for me, it's just getting better is just really getting closer to who we are. And sometimes that requires really rough things in our lives. We think that it's a catastrophe, but maybe your friend's cancer is an invitation to his spiritual awakening, and you just don't know.
And, did you know why it was 20 times? Because I know that quote. I used to say it. I was having a rough patch last year. I used to say it a few times before bed, sometimes in the morning. Every day and every way, I get better and better. Did they put is 20 like the magic number, or 21 times? Like, what is it about the number, or does it matter? Or
I don't know. That's just actually his practice, was having like a string with 20 beads or 20 knots and just doing that. And I think it's the repetition, though, of repeating it. I don't know if there's something specific about 20, but having that repetition and doing it right before you go to sleep, right, where you're going to go through that theta state where your brain is really suggestive. And then again, when you wake up, the repetition impresses the subconscious mind.
I'd say repetition is the mother of skill. Yeah, that makes sense. I actually got to start doing that again and again. So how can we find you? Like, where can we book a session or consultation? Like, how do people get into the vortex of the doctor to get this message?
So my website is katiedeming.com, and my podcast is Born to Heal. And on my podcast, I basically share my story of leaving Western medicine and then bring on experts to teach me and my listeners all the things that we should be teaching in Western medicine that we're not.
And you're on social media as well, right?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Mm-hmm.
Are you at Katie, just your first and last name?
Ooh, it's at the Conscious Oncologist. So my practice is called Conscious Oncology because consciousness is the foundation of my healing. And so I call myself the Conscious Oncologist, not because I'm more conscious than anyone else, but because that's the foundation is Conscious Oncology.
Katie, you're amazing. Thank you so much for your medicine and wisdom today, and substance, and all the transparency that we had. This was a phenomenal interview. Thank you once again. People, follow her, Conscious Oncologist. Go to her website, tap in with her frequency. It's definitely a miracle season, because the information we got today is timeless. It's going to last a lifetime. And we look forward to the movie. We look forward to the movie and more healing for the universe. This is another Spiritual Fit podcast interview. We're out. Share, subscribe, like, and thank you.